Hello everyone, Wolfie here. Regardless of WotLK being fresh or not, the majority of players get to that point where they can't decide what class to main, either from not having any characters or having too many they leveled up in TBC. Same problem, we can't all be druids, right? Whoops, wrong script. Anyway, you might have an itch for something new, something different, since you are tired of Destro Warlocks, combat rogues, and just tons of Fury Warriors and Hunters. Thanks to Wrath of the Lich King, we are getting a whole 30-ish specs that can be playable and viable in PvE, plus minus a few we're gonna mention at some point. Starting with the new kid in the class, Death Knights, or commonly known as DKs, with the average name of XX Artus XX, are all the new hype. Starting from level 55, you skip pretty much 95% of vanilla content and go through TBC, where you learn how to tank or DPS with this new class. DKs are versatile, with 3 viable specs and few more others which are less viable in majority of expansion, like Blood DPS or Unholy Tank. Blood DK tank will be strong always. The amount of threat and self-healing, survivability abilities it has is massive, plus Hysteria buff for some melee that pays you good money to spam it on them. However, without the ability to block, it has to rely mostly on dodge, parry and huge health pool. So closer to the end of the expansion, it just takes over some traditional tanking class like Warrior. Frost and Unholy DKs as DPS are similar, but depending on the player's preferred playstyle, it can differ. You can play drums or you can bonk with a two-hander. Frost usually uses 2 one-handers and it's prevalent on a single DPS fight, whereas Unholy will do decent on a single target and mass damage in AoE pools. Out of raid utilities, DKs do bring different stuff on the table, such as melee haste, increased spell damage, and attack power with each spec respectively. But more about it in DK specific video, so stay tuned and strike that subscribe button to be notified when it goes live. Leveling a DK is a piece of cake actually, just by going through the Death Knight campaign and finishing all quests. There you get a nice set of greens and blues that will carry your dead ass through the entire Outland almost. Loads of damage and self-healing help you to level both as tank or DPS, since Dungeon Finder will be sweet for tank leveling through instances, which I do recommend if you want to pursue blood tanking, as it's awesome practice. Do I see a lot of players playing Death Knights from day one? Yes, definitely. New toy, new abilities, freaking Death Grip, holy moly, I wanna log mine right now. Both tanking and DPSing specs have interesting abilities and rotation, combined with the new resource system, runes and runic power offer. This will be a go-to class for old WotLK lovers and players. General feeling of playing a DK is just nothing you have experienced in TBC or vanilla so far. How overpowered it was and always has been will give you the sense of playing the boss NPC and not just the class. But not Terran NPC, he was a wuss. Anyway, regardless of your main class choosing, I suggest at least make a DK and go through campaign and try to level it. By that time, you will either get hooked on or just go back to whatever class you enjoy more. Continuing the list is the Hunters, absolute unit and god tier in TBC, as we all know, especially in the last phase with the armor penetration tsunami of items given to them. In WotLK, however, I'll slap you with the harsh truth.
Mother of all nerf hammers have landed upon thee.
Many of the abilities and talents have gotten reworked, and even pets now have their own talent tree. Kill command, for example, now can be activated whenever off of 1 minute cooldown and increases damage done by pet by 60% on next 3 special hits, and after every hit the effect is reduced by 20%. Pretty lame. Also, Beast Within only increases damage done by you by 10%, but it does reduce mana cost of your abilities by 50% and so on. Surely base damage is higher, but Beastmaster Hunter is only but limping behind many other classes and spec in Wrath of the Lich King. Hunter now has all 3 specs viable to play in PvE, however the dominant one in majority of expansion is Marksman Hunter, followed by Survival in first half of expansion, while Beast Mastery is keeping up from the beginning of expansion only to fall off far behind towards the second half. Leveling in Northrend is best done as BM spec, which this time around has the majority of talents boosting damage done by your pet, while Marksman can't do good since pet can't hold aggro against you. Survival, on the other hand, can be interesting with trap weaving and kiting, but I would recommend it to someone who is not experienced with Hunter in the first place. No Karen, playing Hunter in TBC only in tier 6 raid does not make you an experienced Hunter. Although, if you choose to level through dungeons and instances, survival and beast mastery might come on par. Do I see a lot of players playing this class? I'd say yes, but not as much as in TBC. In the case of progressive servers, yeah, a lot of people will continue to play it as their true mains, but in the case of fresh, not really no, there will be a similar number of them. General feeling of playing a hunter includes pet and mana management, since Viper is quite punishing and Dragonhawk is quite rewarding, along with restocking your ammo still. But keep in mind that quivers and ammo pouches don't increase haste anymore, and ammo can be stacked up to 1000. As a hunter, you won't be doing sick damage, and especially won't be doing so through one button macro, but rather you will have some utility and fun time being average DPS. Which class is the second most populated DPS class in TBC? What do you think? Of course it's a Warlock. Or at least it used to be, since the majority of rogues and fury warriors were pushed and refuged into PvP. Anyway, much like hunters, Destro warlocks were nerfed in order to make two other specs more viable. This went on to make the other two specs way more competitive, sometimes even overachieving what Destro used to be, especially towards the end of the expansion. Unlike Beastmaster Hunter, Destro will push from the start, but during the middle of expansion, Bursty Demo with good raid support will take over. Affliction Warlock got some love and it just kept being good and getting better towards the endgame. It has constant output in DPS fights with a wicked execute phase. Destro turns its burstiness towards PvP in twos with Ela Shaman for example. They can obliterate anyone in just a double tap. Leveling spec doesn't matter that much, you can go with whichever you want and it will do good both in open world questing and inside dungeon leveling. Will a lot of players play Warlock? Most likely in case of progression servers, but I see the number going down, way down in case of fresh. Surely you can do decent damage with it, but hardcore cast or min-maxers will go Mage or stay as Lock and others will choose a different main, or pick up a new DK class for example. General feeling of playing a Lock shifts from pure damage to support and decent damage. Affliction gets interesting rotation, a lot of abilities, including minion abilities, and their playstyle resembles a lot to Shadow Priest in TBC, which further on means that not everyone will be a damage carrying Affliction in raid. Demonology has a decent damage, just like Affliction, with somewhat easier rotation that relies on talent procs, but raids usually you want one per raid, as it becomes more of a support class with spell damage raid-wide buff. Playing it for Metamorphosis is a legit reason to main it in WotLK. Destro, as said earlier, has nice burst with Mesmeric Chaos Bolt and juicy Soulfire crits, highest flat damage in game. So yeah, Warlock is still fun both in PvE and PvP, but will lag just a little bit under some other classes on DPS meters. Warriors. What do you think when you hear the word? A warrior in Wrath of the Lich King, Giga Chad, popularity and damage, Titan Grip of dreams come true, or just Bladestorm. All of that and even more. You can say that warriors have aged pretty darn well, especially since most of the streamers either main it or come back around for it just to claim glaives. Anyhow, aging well part can be said about protection warriors. Yeah, they are playable and yeah, they're capable of doing so much single target damage and less threat, but almost every other tanking spec in WotL can do the same or even better in some aspects. Apart from Fury and Protection spec, there is still Arm spec as well, just like in TBC. Titan Grip is what puts stars in everyone's eyes. Dual wielding two-hander swords, maces or axes is so epic, but you gotta keep in mind that with that you need high hit rating, decent amount of haste and crit so you're not rage starved, since both main hand and off hand will swing every 3 or more seconds, meaning Fury will get its time to shine later on in the expansion, around tier 9. Until then, Bladestorm Arms Warrior will have the spotlight, along with Protection Warrior. In PvP sphere, warriors will be just as strong, like DKs. Warriors were always pure DPS class, and since they don't bring as much utility to raid, they do compensate for it in damage, and since majority of buffs and auras are raid-wide in WotL, it means that you can comfortably stack multiple warriors and achieve awesome results. Leveling a warrior doesn't differ from before. Even revenge spam Protection Warrior is viable, especially for dungeon leveling. Will there be a lot of players playing it? Oh yeah, I don't even need to say it. I don't know what is people's craze about it. Easy and monotone playstyle or ability to focus only on dealing damage since you have zero raid mechanics you have to take care of. unlike hunters for example. From the beginning of expansion, mostly it will be spread over prot and arm spec. And then all of those will funnel at once into pure Fury Warrior as soon as we step into TOTS and ICC. There will be only Fury Warriors everywhere. General feeling of playing this class is feeling of power with either Bladestorm or Titan Grip crits. No doubt that Warrior is a beast in right hands, but decently good in left hands as well. If you have been with me for some time, you're aware of my hate towards the yellow color and scum that plays it. Surely there are decent people who just happen to stick with rogues, but overall I can't stand it. Too frustrating to PvP against, or just to mind your own business in open world on the PvP realm. However, I'm getting milder towards them in WotLK. I have grown and I'm ready to accept them as a proper class in PvE scene without resenting them from the bottom of my sabatons. From single viable PvE spec, rogues are getting an additional one, assassination spec, which is the prevalent one in early stages. Combat just won't do good early on due to scalability and gear dependency, but it will pay back many times over in the endgame with a lot of agility, good weapons and armor penetration. Assassination will still be decently strong in good hands, but overall combat will just do more. Seeing that rogue melee attacks actually do a lot of damage will bring a smile to many rogue mains from Vanilla WoW. Sub will remain a PvP spec in its own league, but that's all about it. Fresh and welcome addition to Rogue's arsenal is definitely a fan of Nice. An AoE ability with 50 energy cost on GCD. With daggers, adrenaline rush and huge amounts of mobs, rogues can easily jump on top of the damage meters. Rogue's raid and party utility changes a little bit with TOT. It acts as a nice threat boost for a tank since Rogue's opening burst is among the biggest one in Wrath of the Lich King, especially combined with Adrenaline Rush. Look at me talking about it like I'm in love with it, which I'm definitely not. Maybe a little bit. Leveling a rogue is a piece of cake. I don't even have to elaborate on that. Stun lock, evasion, and you can even solo elites. Do I see a lot of players playing rogues? Yes, definitely. Pure DPS class with just as easy rotation but more damage will fill up the majority of raid spots always, especially towards the end where raid leaders will look for combat rogues especially. Pick a rogue if you never played any other class, or if you never played WoW altogether. Level it up and then practice your rotation like a proper rogue, not on a target dummy, but on lowbies innocently leveling in Stragglethorn Vale or in Borean Tundra. And now to sing the song of Fire and Ice, or Fire and Arcane to be precise, since Frost is by far the worst DPS out of 3 mage specs, though it is still regarded as a really strong PvP spec. Surely it can do some damage and has interesting rotation in PvE, but Arcane in early game and especially Fire in late game will out DPS it by far. So there you go, Cold Truth goes well with my preference of warmth over coldness. In comparison with other classes and specs, mages are still hanging there near the top of the damage meters, just like in TBC and Echoes of Vanilla. Raid utility has been increased to a possibility of Dalaran Brilliance and Focus Magic, which is symbiote buff mage can cast on other raid or party members, actively increasing their spell crit by 3% and achieving same buff every time buffed player scores a critical hit. Leveling a mage is best to be done in Frost spec due to survivability and pet usage. Do I see a lot of players playing a mage? Well, more or less those who always play the mage since vanilla will continue to play it. All the buffs and additions to mage arsenal won't differentiate it a lot from other casters, especially in playstyle. Also with the fact that mage is just a pure DPS such as Fury Warriors on the melee side of the DPS spectrum. As aforementioned, Arcane will scale better in early game, but once you reach the high enough crit chance rating, Fireball plus Pyroblast and Hot Streak will burn your name on top of the damage meters. Add sustained damage in both specs, high mobility and excellent burst as Arcane, I promise you Mage is enjoyable as it always was. The most desirous of TBC is by far a Shaman. Why? Well, party-wide Bloodlust, the best ability in the entire game. Even though you might think, well, then it's probably the most played as well. Yes, but no. There was always a Shaman missing because nobody liked to play them due to simple rotation, totems, low output, although rest of Shamans were beasts in the last phases. In WotLK, however, with changes implemented for Shamans, their Bloodlust is raid-wide and leaves 10 minutes Sata debuff, along with raid-wide totems, which means you need 1 or 2 Shamans maximum per raid. Resto Shaman stayed beasts, but due to no more downranking, they're quite mana unsustainable at lower gear. It's just something that I found obnoxious from time to time, but later on, Resto Shamans were just incredible. Nicely optimized gear and a lot of MP5 does wonders. That one, or the one out of two Shamans you take to the WotLK raid is definitely restoration. Enhancement Shaman, what to say about that? If you liked it in TBC, you surely will in WotLK as well, as it's awesome from the start. They pulled a break towards the endgame though. Rotation remained ever so interesting, especially for Spellhand Shaman, but without sometimes annoying totem twisting. Way to a good enhancement is managing your cooldowns and shocks well. If you manage to do so, you're a goddamn Thor with the axes. Elemental Shaman remains meh. Yeah, they are mid-tier to above mid-tier DPS at the beginning of expansion, so you might think that they are great. That's true to some extent, cause they don't scale as much with gear like some other classes. At the end of the expansion they are gonna be decent if RNG says so, but nowhere near the top of damage meters. Utility Elemental Shamans give to the raid is not unique, since beside totems any other utility is either same as some other classes or even worse than those, leaving a Shaman to be average DPS that provides bloodlust or heroism for those on the wrong side of the conflict. Leveling is best done as enhancement due to awesome burst potential with rather short cooldown. However, consider Resto Shaman if you want to level through instances. Will a lot of players play Shaman? No more than there are Shamans at the moment. The true mains, the general feeling of playing a Shaman is subjective. If you like the playstyle, don't let any other color even try to convince you otherwise. It is a versatile and gimmicky class, from critting and having cool visual abilities, to dull but very OP healing in the right gear set. Speaking of which, gearing up a Shaman is so easy due to optimized male gear, especially Resto Shaman. Of course, there is a Holy Paladin to steal a piece or two, but they do have optimized plate healing items, so just rub that on their face. About priests, well, it goes from extreme to extreme. Disco Priest next to useless in TBC, but now in Wrath of the Lich King it will be a must-to-have one per raid class. Preventing or absorbing damage before it bites a part of character's HP pool is what they excel at, even though add-ons like Recount don't pick that up. It surely is a huge amount, so you do want to prioritize a Disco Priest for 25-man raids, because their penance and cheap flash heals are gonna be less effective, for example in dungeons. But in dungeons damage is not that great, but it still can add up. Even though their spells are costing a lot of mana, they have nice replenishment for themselves from talents and abilities such as Hymn of Hope and all-time popular Shadow Fiend. With more and more intellect, Disco becomes quite self-sustained and can carry out fights without going On top of that, it has two awesome cooldowns, one which resembles Hysteria from DKs, but does not stack with Bloodlust, and other one for naughty DPSers who over-aggro. Holy Priest, the healing class of TBC, just carrying both AoE healing and single target. But now in WotLK it just falls behind a little, behind scaled up Resto Shamans, new Resto Druids and improved Holy Paladins. It still has the potential and really strong cooldowns. To hell, even Light Duel is kinda viable now. The Holy Priest's strong side is its weakness at the same time. Being able to cover any type of healing needed and work in synergy with other healers makes Holy Priest good at everything, but not strongest in anything. Raid healing with Pom, Paw or Co is great, but mana intensive, where a Druid can just hot around like a madman and wild growth every cooldown for even higher output and half the mana cost. Main tank, heal spamming with huge heals and Guardian is also good, but Holy Paladin literally laughs, chats and watches Wolfie videos on second monitor while doing it easier and more efficiently, and so on. So take it with a grain of salt and please by all means prove me wrong and say,
"Hey Forehead, Holy Priest is stronger than you think, and here's why."
And then explain your stand through an essay or a video. However, the DPS spec, Shadow Priest found a new power in the form of new spells like Mindseer for example. Shadow Priest will be quite decent DPS throughout the entire expansion, from start to the end. And it's gonna make some of us main Shadow Priest in TBC quite happy. Same thing that buffed Affliction Warlocks so much is doing the same for Shadow Priest, and you know what I'm talking about. Purple colors. Nah, I'm joking, is the dot critting ability, which is huge since the vast majority of Shadow Priest damage comes from dots. Also combine AoE ability with the multi-dot and you get really strong caster DPS that has some awesome utility in form of debuffs on target, can be stacked in raid composition to boost overall DPS, heals while doing damage, can dispel and disperse, fade, blah blah blah. It's overall really rounded and fun to play with ever-changing and interesting rotation, which is modified by stats and gear you have. On top of that, it remained the face melter in PvP still. Do I see a lot of players playing priests? I'd say about the same amount as now. Maybe a tad bit more as Shadow Priest since it will have a nice output at the beginning. But healing specs of it won't be stacked and will count at least one, either Holy or Discipline. Or one of each as long as Holy is not shielding anyone. Having a priest with either healing or spec in WotLK is not a bad choice if you're into this thing. Now for the one class that is definitely booming in WotLK, in every aspect of it, is a Paladin. Even before WotLK it had all 3 specs viable in raid setup and any other content, but now it just breaks free, unleashing abilities to tank and threat, to heal and save and do DPS and strike with big two-handers. Protection Paladin as the biggest improvement just sweeps out Warrior off of its feet as the main tank, even Death Knights on low gear level due to some awesome cooldowns and talents. I mean, DK tank is a DK tank, a league of its own, but Prot Pala rises from AoE tank to Giga Chad full tank behemoth. Now that Paladins are no longer relying on spell power items to dish out threat and damage, it can do much more. And by more, I mean just being 4 DPS in a dungeon, sometimes beating even pure DPS classes and spec on damage done overall. Retribution as my favorite melee spec in TBC improved and it's quite decent in WotLK. They do scale well with more haste and crit, especially in the endgame they will be doing nice damage due to the majority of mobs being undead. In the beginning, however, more or less. Frost DKs will do better, for example, since Retribution output will fall off outside of its burst cooldown. What makes me happy about Retribution is that Seal Twisting is a thing of the past, and Retribution now has a proper identity with reworked spells, cleave ability, and kept its raid utility, along with cooldowns just like any Paladin spec. I think it's important to note that they do some off-healing while dealing damage, both to themselves and others around themselves, which together with the plate armor and other cooldowns and bursts makes threats quite hard to deal with in PvP still. Holy Paladins, I won't say much, because I believe they are mega popular and just a stronger single target healer throughout the expansion. However, with downranking dead and your Holy Light costing a bit over 1000 mana, you might find yourself struggling with mana where even Divine Plea won't help. After reaching a huge amount of intellect, you can just spam away more. Being OP, it doesn't mean it's fun to play. Surely you will top them healing meters, but rotation, well, the amount of spells used is just scarce. So it will be deal on or deal off for many players choosing Holy Paladins as their main. So do I think there will be a lot of Paladins in WotLK? Hell yeah, Protodins, Retodins and Holadins alike will be all populated throughout the expansion. The amount of rework spells for Paladins is huge. Starting with Blessings, there is a reduced amount of it, to the point where you almost don't even have to use a Pally Power. But please do still. Same goes for seals. The biggest change being taking out the entire seal of the Crusader, and some others along with some blessings were converted into hand spells. So it's safe to say that min-maxers from TBC will jump into the warrior wagon, but when it fills up, they will drop down into Paladin Joyride. Lastly, cherry on top, my favorite class of all. Druid remains epic as ever, and I don't care what you think of them in TBC. I assure you, Druids can be one of your top picks in WotLK. Either a leafy healer, cute kitty, fuzzy burb, or guardian bear. Just the sheer amount of specs available for one class is a selling point. It was the same in TBC, but now in WotLK you can actually stack Druids easily without drawback. And each one of them brings Druid utilities. Restoration Druid healing arsenal has been increased by 2 additional spells, Nourish and Wild Growth, which makes Restore Druids highly versatile in a single target and raid-wide healing. I fell in love with this new Restore Druid, and since it's so strong from the beginning to the end of the expansion. Boomkins went from decent support class for Warlocks and Mages to above average DPS capabilities, especially in the AoE fights with the new most OP AoE ability in the game, the Starfall. Also, next to Aura, which is raid wide now, they have Earth and Moon, which does the same thing as Curse of Elements does, for example. Rotation now includes more than just one Starfire. Rotation now includes more than just a Starfire spam as well, but with much better mana regen and mana management. Feral Bear Tank, it was my favorite class and my main for a long time in TBC, I just loved it. In WotLK it remains what it is, a dodge HP tank that deals a lot of damage. Single target threat is amazing as always, but now with 360-degree swipe, you can AoE tank better than before. Surely it won't be uber threat like Paladin's Consecration or DK's D&D, but it will still be better than what it used to be. On top of that, Bear got some new and improved cooldowns to boost its survivability. Kitty DPS as fourth and last viable Druid spec, heavily played in WotLK, is amazing. It has the hardest rotation, but if you manage to learn it and practice it enough, you will see pretty high numbers. Especially in late game when you acquire a big chunk of armor penetration. Then you will easily compete for the first spot on damage done with Fury Warriors. I won't go deeper into abilities and how to manage your rotation in this video, maybe in the future. Do I see a lot of players playing Druids? Yeah, I do, a decent amount. Who enjoy Druids in TBC will continue to like it in WotLK. But I predict some new players picking it up just because it is so versatile, and if you can't decide what role to play, you can make a choice down the road of leveling and still be viable. Before wrapping up a video, I want to add a disclaimer this time around. WotLK added a lot of balance to all classes. At the same gear level, the majority will do almost the same amount of damage with several percents less or more. Also inside the class and spec itself, there can be big oscillation in terms of mastering the rotation, optimizing your gear, reaching caps, and having a good RNG on proccing talents and such. Just pick the class you think you will have the most fun with and play it for fun. When and if it comes to it that it becomes boring, switch spec or entire class. Even some that were boring in TBC are now really fun. For example, I personally never liked Paladins, but I had a blast playing one through WotLK. So yeah, there's that. Don't forget to pick that like button and subscribe if you think that Arthas did nothing wrong. Stay safe and have fun playing the game. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.